I was a slightly scrawny 19-year-old college student named Alex, perpetually hunched over a laptop, my brown hair usually a tangled mess. Most nights, I filled my small apartment with the hum of electronics and the clack of my keyboard, my preferred company being the obscure corners of the internet. That's how I stumbled upon it, the Midnight Game. It was a ritual, a legend, supposedly an old pagan punishment for those who defied their gods. The rules were intricate, unsettling, and strangely specific. Paper, a drop of your blood, a match, a wooden door, a candle, and salt. You were to write your name on the paper, prick your finger, and let a drop of your blood fall onto it. Place it before a closed wooden door, light a candle, place it on the paper, and then, precisely at 12 a.m., knock on the door 22 times, blowing out the candle on the final knock. Then you opened the door, stepped inside, closed it, and immediately relit your candle. The goal was simple: survive until 3:33 a.m. without your candle going out. If it did, you had to relight it within 10 seconds. Fail that, and the Midnight Man would manifest, inducing your deepest fear until 3:33 a.m. He couldn't physically harm you, the legend claimed, but the psychological torment was said to be profound. Salt circles offered protection, a temporary sanctuary. The whole thing sounded like elaborate internet fiction, but something about the meticulous detail, the sheer absurdity, lodged itself in my mind. It was a particularly lonely Tuesday night, a cold drizzle tapping against my window, and I was deep into a procrastination spiral. Boredom, that most dangerous of catalysts, mixed with a morbid curiosity, began to ferment. My small apartment had a solid wooden door, the main entry, and I had everything else. I dismissed the idea, then revisited it. It was just a game, a silly ritual. What was the worst that could happen? I was alone, miles from home, seeking a thrill, however manufactured. As midnight approached, a knot formed in my stomach. I found an old envelope, pricked my finger with a sterile needle, better safe than sorry, even for a fake ritual, and watched a bead of crimson bloom on the paper. I lit the cheap pillar candle I'd bought from a dollar store. The digital clock on my phone ticked over, 11:59 p.m. My heart hammered. I placed the paper and candle before the door, took a deep breath, and prepared myself. 12 a.m. Thump, thump, thump. I knocked, counting each dull reverberation. On the 22nd knock, I blew out the candle, plunging the tiny entryway into sudden, absolute darkness. A strange metallic tang filled the air. I opened the door, stepped through, and quickly closed it, my fingers fumbling for the lighter. The candle flickered back to life, a fragile beacon against the encroaching black. The game had begun. The first hour was nothing, just the oppressive silence of my apartment amplified by the ritual and the frantic pounding of my own pulse. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the wall, eyes darting, my candle clutched tight. Every creak of the building, every distant car horn was magnified. Around 1:30 a.m. I heard it. A faint whisper, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, seemed to emanate from the kitchen. I froze, holding my breath. My candle flickered violently, almost snuffing out. I shielded it, my entire body rigid. It settled. Then, the distinct sound of slow, heavy footsteps, not on my floor, but around me, circling the living room. They were too heavy for a mouse, too slow for a cat. A prickle of genuine fear traced its way down my spine. This wasn't just my imagination. I instinctively pulled out the rock salt I had, quickly pouring a crude circle around myself, the grains crunching under my trembling fingers. The footsteps continued, sometimes near, sometimes distant, always just out of sight. I could feel a strange cold spot shifting, moving around my salt circle, a subtle drop in temperature that sent shivers through my very bones. I stayed huddled, clutching the candle, eyes wide, until, blessedly, my phone's clock rolled over to 3:33 a.m. The game was officially over. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a release, a sudden lightness. The cold spot receded, the heavy lurking presence seemed to dissolve. I blew out the candle, my hands still shaking, and stumbled to bed, utterly exhausted. The morning sun felt like a benediction, washing away the phantom dread. I convinced myself it was just an overactive imagination, a byproduct of sleep deprivation and suggestion. I had survived. The Midnight Man was gone. Or so I thought. A few days later, subtle things began. A faint musty smell, like damp earth and old leather, would occasionally waft through my apartment, even though it was meticulously clean. My lights would flicker, not just once, but in rhythmic patterns that felt deliberate. I'd find objects moved, my keys on a different hook, a book I was reading lying open on a page I hadn't reached yet. I'd shrug them off, blaming faulty wiring or my own absent-mindedness. Then came the footsteps. I lived on the 3rd floor. There were no upstairs neighbors. Yet, late at night, often around midnight, I would hear the distinct sound of slow, heavy footsteps on the floor above me. But then they would be on my floor, in the hallway, then the living room. I'd spring up, convinced it was a break-in, only to find every door locked, every window secured, and my apartment utterly empty. The chill in the air would linger. One night, almost a week after the game, I was trying to fall asleep, the usual late-night quiet pressing in. Just before 3 a.m., a sound cut through the silence. Thump, thump, thump. 22 distinct knocks. Not on my front door, not on the neighbor's wall, but on my bedroom door, from the inside of my apartment. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a dream. It was the same rhythm, the same dull, heavy sound as the start of the midnight game. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the duvet over my head, trembling violently. My breath hitched in my throat. I heard the faint creak of my doorknob turning, slowly, deliberately. It twisted, then released. A long, drawn-out sigh seemed to pass through the room, a chilled breath that ruffled the edges of my duvet. I lay there, rigid, until the first rays of dawn pierced through my blinds. I never opened my eyes, never looked. The knocking stopped, the turning of the knob stopped, but the presence, I knew, had not left. The subtle occurrences didn't cease. The cold spots would still appear, the musty smell would still return. Sometimes I'd swear I could see a tall, shadowy figure in my peripheral vision, just at the edge of my sight, only to vanish when I turned. I tried smudging with sage, placing more salt circles, even moving furniture. Nothing worked. The midnight game had ended, but its invisible guest had apparently decided to stay. I rarely sleep through the night anymore. Every creak, every shadow, every fleeting scent reminds me. He's here, somewhere in the quiet corners of my apartment, always just there, waiting for midnight to bring his subtle, chilling presence back into focus. I was a skinny, perpetually anxious 22-year-old college student. My dark hair always a disheveled mess, perpetually hidden under a worn beanie. My eyes, usually wide with a mix of curiosity and dread, reflected every late-night study session and caffeine-induced panic attack. It was during one particularly severe bout of procrastination, deep down the rabbit hole of internet forums, that I stumbled upon it. The Three Kings Ritual. The threads were a mix of believers and skeptics, but the sheer detail and the chilling warnings caught my attention. It promised a journey to another dimension, a chance to speak with one's subconscious, or perhaps something far older and less human. The allure was irresistible, a dangerous itch I felt compelled to scratch. I spent days meticulously researching every instruction, every warning, every supposed consequence. It wasn't just some silly sleepover game. It was intricate, requiring specific objects, a particular setup, and a precise sequence of actions. My roommate, Mark, a sensible engineering student, laughed it off when I mentioned it. "Dude, you're gonna give yourself nightmares. Just watch a horror movie." But I knew this was different. This wasn't about being scared. It was about experiencing something profoundly other. The ritual required a large, empty room. My parents' old, seldom-used guest room back home, during a weekend when they were out of town, seemed perfect. I gathered the items: 2 large mirrors, a bucket of water, a fan, 3 chairs, a small candle, a clock, and a personal item I valued. The instructions emphasized that it had to be a personal item of sentimental value, not monetary. I chose a tarnished silver locket my grandmother had given me, always believing it held a piece of her spirit. The most crucial part was setting it up correctly. At 11 p.m., I started. The large chair, the throne, went in the center of the room. 2 smaller chairs representing the queen and the fool were placed facing it, each with a bucket of water at its base. The fan was positioned to blow towards the throne. 1 mirror went behind the throne, reflecting it. The other mirror was placed in front, angled to reflect the first mirror. This created an infinite tunnel, a visual loop into nothingness. The windows and doors had to be completely covered, blocking all light from outside. Every clock in the house had to be set to the correct time, with the exception of the ritual room clock, which was to be wound forward by 1 hour. The instructions also stated I needed a guardian, but that guardian was to be in a separate room, asleep, with an alarm set for 3:30 a.m. My mind raced. Mark was back at school, so I couldn't ask him. I considered not having one, but the warnings about losing myself in the other dimension were too stark. In the end, I convinced my younger sister Emily, who was home for the weekend, that I was just doing a weird art project and needed her to set an alarm in her room. She begrudgingly agreed, more interested in her phone than my strange request. At precisely 12 a.m., I was in the room, the single candle my only light source, positioned just in front of the throne, to my right. The air was still, heavy with a suffocating silence. I double-checked everything, Doors locked, windows sealed, clock set. I extinguished the candle. The room plunged into absolute darkness, an inky void that felt oppressive. Then I turned on the fan. The hum was instantly disorienting, a low, droning thrumming that filled my ears, masking any subtle creaks or distant sounds. I sat on the throne chair, facing the mirror in front of me, staring into the infinite reflections. It was supposed to be a journey to the void, a place beyond our reality. The instructions warned against fear, against opening my eyes until I felt a presence. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. I stared into the darkness, the fan's relentless hum vibrating through the chair, through my bones. Time seemed to stretch and warp. Minutes felt like hours. My eyes strained, searching for definition in the blackness, for any flicker in the mirror's depth. My mind began to play tricks. Shapes formed and dissolved at the edges of my vision, phantom movements in the peripheral. I felt a chill, not from the fan, but from an unseen source, a cold that seeped into my very core. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. It wasn't just me and the fan anymore. I felt watched. The feeling intensified, growing from a vague suspicion to an undeniable certainty. A pressure built behind my eyes, and my head began to throb. I felt a pull, a sensation of being stretched thin, like elastic. Then a whisper. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but a thought that materialized directly in my mind, cold and alien. It was a question, formless but deeply unsettling, probing at my anxieties, my greatest regrets. I focused on my breathing, remembering the instructions. Do not engage, do not acknowledge. I kept my gaze fixed on the endless reflection, even as the darkness seemed to deepen, to take on a physical form around me. The fan's hum, once a constant, began to distort, sounding like distant screams, then a mournful, drawn-out wail. My perception of the room shifted. I was no longer in my parents' guest room. I was in an endless, echoing cavern, cold and damp. The mirrors were gone, replaced by shimmering, translucent walls that seemed to breathe. I knew I was no longer alone. A shape began to coalesce in front of me, in the space where the front mirror should have been. It was indistinct, a wavering column of shadow, yet I felt its immense, ancient presence. This was the queen, or perhaps the fool, the entities described in the ritual. It felt neither benevolent nor malicious, simply other, observing me with an unearthing, silent intensity. The whispers returned, more insistent, closer now, tempting me to look away, to break the focus. I gripped the arms of the chair, my knuckles white, my breathing shallow. I could feel my locket, clutched in my other hand, growing intensely cold, as if it was absorbing the chill of this other place. The instructions demanded I remain seated, silent and observant. If I engaged, if I spoke, I risked being trapped, or worse, bringing something back with me. The silence from the entity was deafening, the pressure in the room almost unbearable. I felt a desperate urge to run, to scream, to break free from the invisible bonds holding me. But I remembered the 3:30 a.m. deadline, Emily's alarm. That was my anchor. I could not, would not miss it. I focused my entire being on the knowledge that an alarm would sound, that I would return. The entity seemed to sense my resolve, or perhaps my fear. It shimmered, growing taller, its formless outline seeming to lean closer. I felt a cold touch against my forehead, fleeting but undeniable, like a damp skeletal finger. Suddenly, just as I felt myself teetering on the edge of panic, the blare of Emily's alarm sliced through the suffocating atmosphere. It was distant, muffled by the closed door, but it was there. The entity in front of me recoiled, dissolving back into the darkness. The air lightened, the oppressive weight lifting. The fan's hum returned to its normal drone. The shimmering walls faded, replaced by the familiar inky black of the room. It was over. I stumbled out of the chair, fumbling for the candle and matches. My hands trembled so violently I could barely strike a light. When the flame finally caught, casting flickering shadows, the room looked exactly as it had before. The chairs, the mirrors, the buckets of water, all precisely where I had placed them. But the air was different. It felt thin, brittle, as if stretched to its breaking point. I looked at the clock I had set forward. It read 3:35 a.m. Emily's alarm must have gone off at 3:30 a.m., my time. I had made it. I looked at my locket. It was still impossibly cold, despite being in my warm hand for minutes. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. A powerful self-hypnosis brought on exhaustion and suggestion. But small things changed. I felt an undeniable shift in my perception, a lingering awareness of something beyond the mundane. I started seeing subtle flickers in my peripheral vision, reflections in glass that didn't quite match reality. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of my own reflection and see for a fleeting second a shadow moving behind me, too quick to be real, too dark to be dismissed. My locket, once just a cherished family heirloom, now felt like a conduit, occasionally growing cold without explanation, a faint hum resonating from within it. I never spoke of the ritual again, not even to Mark, but I knew with a chilling certainty that while I had technically returned, a part of me had been left in that other dimension, and perhaps a small, cold piece of that dimension had hitched a ride back with me.
I was a naturally thin, pale 20-year-old with perpetually tired eyes and a mop of dark brown hair that always seemed to fall into my face, regardless of how often I pushed it back. My nights were often spent scrolling through obscure corners of the internet, a habit born of an insatiable, if somewhat morbid, curiosity. One particularly desolate Tuesday, I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to dark rituals. Most of it was predictable internet creepypasta, the usual blood sacrifices and nonsensical incantations. But then I found it, the Red Book Ritual. The instructions were simple, almost childishly so, which was probably what made them so insidious. No complex ingredients, no elaborate setups, just a few common household items and a quiet space. The goal? To communicate with a spirit, usually a child's, and ask questions. The warnings, tucked away at the bottom of the posts, were vague but chilling. Do not disrespect them, do not anger them, do not fail to close the book. It sounded like a glorified Ouija board, a game for bored teenagers. But something about the calm, almost clinical tone of the descriptions, the absolute certainty of the supposed participants, lodged itself in my mind. Skepticism warred with an unsettling fascination. Could there really be something to this? Or was it just a collective delusion, a shared hallucination brought on by suggestion and a lack of sleep? I had to find out. My roommate was out of town, visiting family, leaving me with the entire house to myself, perfect for an experiment I wasn't entirely proud of. I gathered the items, an old blank red journal I'd bought years ago for sketching and never used, a small hand mirror from my bathroom, and a white candle. I waited until the dead of night, past midnight, when the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across my bedroom window and the silence outside was absolute. I drew the curtains, plunging the room into near total darkness, save for the weak glow of my phone screen as I reread the instructions one last time. Following the guide, I placed the mirror face up on the floor in the center of the room. The red book went on top of it, its cover a stark crimson against the reflective surface. I lit the candle, setting it beside the book, its small flame flickering nervously, the only source of light in the oppressive gloom. The air immediately felt heavier, colder, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I sat down cross-legged before the setup, placing my hands gently on the closed red book. My heart was thudding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, a mixture of adrenaline and genuine apprehension. The instructions stated I needed to empty my mind, focus on my question, and then gently rub the book's cover while chanting, red book, may I enter your game?" I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and began. The words felt silly coming out of my mouth, a whispered incantation in the quiet room. I rubbed the smooth cover, feeling the slight indentation of the pages beneath my fingertips. I repeated the phrase, focusing on the echo of my own voice in the silence. After several minutes, my hands began to tingle, a strange pins and needles sensation that quickly spread up my arms. The air grew colder still, and I could feel a distinct chill pressing against my back, as if someone was standing directly behind me. I wanted to open my eyes, to glance over my shoulder, but the instructions were clear. Do not open your eyes until you hear a response or feel the presence recede. Then a faint, almost imperceptible sound broke the silence. It wasn't a voice, not exactly, more like a whisper of shifting paper, a rustling coming from the book itself, followed by a faint, breathy sigh right next to my ear. It was so real, so immediate, that I involuntarily flinched. My eyes flew open. The candle flame danced wildly, casting long, wavering shadows that made the familiar objects in my room seem menacing. The air was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. My hands were still on the book, but now I felt a distinct pressure pushing back, a subtle vibration that wasn't my imagination. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. Red book, I whispered, my voice shaky. What is your name?" The instructions stated that after asking a question, I was to carefully lift the book, turn it over, and open it to a random page. The answer would be found in the first word I saw, or a combination of words. With trembling hands, I did as instructed. I lifted the book, flipped it open, and looked down. The page was blank, as expected, but in the very center, almost perfectly aligned, was a single, crudely drawn stick figure. It was small, childlike, with oversized eyes and a wide, unsettling smile. and beneath it, written in what looked like faded red crayon, was a single word: Lily. A cold wave of dread washed over me. Lily, a child's name. It was just a drawing, just a word, but in that moment, in that silence, it felt undeniably personal. I closed the book quickly, a jolt of fear running through me. I asked another question, my voice a barely audible tremor. Lily, how old are you? I opened the book again, heart hammering. This time, there was no drawing, just two words, etched as if by a tiny, trembling finger. 8 and lonely. That was it. That was the moment my scientific curiosity shattered into a million pieces. The childish scrawl, the heartbreaking simplicity, it was too much. This wasn't a game. This wasn't my imagination. There was something here, a presence, and it was lonely. A fresh surge of unease gripped me. The warnings flooded back. Do not disrespect them. Do not anger them. The silence in the room felt different now, not just empty, but watched. I knew I needed to end it, to close the ritual. The final instruction was crucial. Red book, I want to leave your game. Then the book had to be closed firmly, the candle extinguished, and the mirror covered. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my eyes darting around the room, half expecting to see a small, shadowy figure in the periphery. Red book, I want to leave your game, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands firmly on the cover. I waited for the sensation of presence to recede, for the cold to dissipate, for the silence to return to normal. But it didn't. Instead, the pressure on my hands intensified, pushing up against me. A guttural, mournful moan, a sound of profound despair and anger, vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't the breathy sigh from before. This was deeper, more resonant, laced with a raw, desperate sorrow that felt ancient and suffocating. The candle flame, which had been dancing, suddenly snuffed itself out, plunging the room into absolute, impenetrable darkness. Panic seized me. My breath hitched in my throat. I tried to pull my hands away from the book, but they felt stuck, clamped down by an unseen force. The mournful sound deepened, morphing into a low, continuous growl that seemed to emanate from all around me, not just the book. I could feel a freezing pressure on my shoulders, then my neck, as if invisible fingers were digging into my skin. "Let me go," I choked out, my voice breaking. My hands finally tore free. I scrambled backward, hitting the wall with a sickening thud. The growling continued, now accompanied with a faint, rhythmic thump, 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 coming from the direction of the mirror. In the absolute blackness, my imagination conjured horrifying images. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I knew I had to get out. I fumbled desperately for my phone, its screen a beacon of sanity in the suffocating darkness. I flicked on the flashlight, illuminating the room in a harsh, narrow beam. The mirror was still there, the red book still on top of it. But now the book was open. Not just open to a random page, but wide open, all its pages splayed out, forming a grotesque fan. And on every single page, covering every inch of paper, were hundreds, thousands of those small, crude stick figures, all with oversized eyes and wide, unsettling smiles. They were all pointing at me. And scrawled in faint, faded red crayon across the entire spread, over and over again, barely legible but undeniably there, "Don't leave me, don't leave me, don't leave me." The thump, thump, thump continued, growing louder, faster. I tore my eyes away from the horrific sight, shining the light around the room. There was nothing, no shadowy figure, no physical manifestation, just the room, my belongings, and the open book. But the air was still frigid, and the growling, though fainter, was still a low hum beneath the thumping. I knew I hadn't closed the book properly. I knew I hadn't ended the game. I grabbed the book, slammed it shut with all my might, and tossed it into the nearest corner, away from the mirror. I snatched a blanket from my bed and threw it over the mirror, then stumbled out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch in the living room, lights blazing, listening to the absolute silence of the house, wondering if the growling I still heard was real or just the echo of fear in my own mind. My roommate came back the next day. I never told him what happened. I never went back into that room until he was home, making sure he was there, a solid, living presence. The red book stayed in that corner for weeks. I finally gathered the courage to pick it up, to throw it away. But when I opened it, intending to rip out the pages, they were all blank. Utterly, completely blank. There was no crayon, no stick figures, no chilling messages. Just pristine, unused paper. Yet, sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my roommate is asleep, I still hear it. A faint, distant thump, thump, thump. And sometimes, when I walk past my bedroom door, I catch a faint, fleeting scent of something sweet, like old, dried crayon. It's a reminder that I didn't just play a game.
I unlocked something, and I left someone lonely behind.